This is Emily Freitag, and I'm so happy to be talking today to Gautam Thapar at Enlighten AI. And as we do with all of these interviews, we're excited to learn more about Enlighten, what you're trying to do, how it's going. And so let's dig in. As we start all of these, please start with your story, Gautam. Tell us, how did you get to the point that you are building this technology and what kind of inspired you along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me today. The story for me really starts back in my classroom. So I'm a former teacher and school leader. And when I was teaching in Richmond, California, most of my students came to me in 11th grade with pretty significant gaps in their writing, especially. 90% of our students earned a 1 on the AP History exam. And the one year when students actually passed the exam, the College Board had somehow lost their essays. And so no pun intended, you literally couldn't have the writing on the wall be any clearer that writing was the problem. And back then, the only way to fix that was just grade and give feedback all the time. So we wrote an essay a week and we built up to time pressure. Um, and that really worked. We had outlier achievement results. The last year I was there, two-thirds of students passed, not a single student with a 1.
Mhm.
But I also had a bald spot on the back of my head to show for all the stress and anxiety that comes with trying to keep up with that type of pace. And if you fast forward, I came back to the same community and founded Invictus Academy of Richmond, which is a small single site charter school. And I was never able to push that practice because we were already asking just so much of our teachers.
Mhm.
And so the thought process for me around Enlighten was how can we center human expertise because that's essential to that feedback being effective, but also capture the efficiencies of AI in the writing process. And so what Enlighten aims to be is that personalized, programmable TA that can accept your context, learn from you, and ultimately extend your voice in the writing process with students.
I enjoyed getting to see it in action. I'm excited to dig in with a bunch of questions, but start by giving us a little bit of the history of the product evolution and what the product really aims to do currently.
Yeah, so the starting point and where we thought we would spend all of our time was as a grading and feedback tool. And that is really the foundation of the writing assessment process in Enlighten. And so you can pull student work in, you can provide the context to the AI. And actually, I can show you this if
Great.
that's probably an e easier way to do it. Um, so you can think of it the way that you would if you were working with an actual TA. So if I was your TA, you wouldn't just hand me a stack of papers and a rubric and say, go for it. There's sort of a collaborative process to train me up, and that's what we're doing with Enlighten. And so you can see that process here. I provided the TA with the scoring rubric for the task, provided it with the entire task, so the prompt, the reading, any reference material students are working with. And then we actually start collaboratively grading. And so the TA will take an attempt at the scores and the feedback based on my initial instructions. But as a good teacher, I'm going to go in, I'm going to edit, I'm going to revise, I'm going to calibrate. And with each click and each submission, the TA is going to learn from what I've saved, what I've revised, and it's going to use that to apply it to the next submission to be a little smarter, a little more accurate, a little better to the standard that I'm looking for. And then ultimately, the goal would be that it's actually able to take the stack, like you see here, generate all of the submissions, take the first pass, and bring it back for my review. Um, and that we think centers the human expertise in the sense that I am at the beginning of the process, I'm at the end of the process. But the messy middle where I'm just sort of rinsing and repeating, that's the part where I'm saving time and doing more of the intellectual work at the end to sort of stamp the results. And then after the fact, it can roll up trends and it can help the teacher to plan a mini reteach. There's lots of stuff that it does to sort of mimic that TA experience. So that's really the foundation of what we do. And then there's a whole other side of the house that I can talk about too.
Well, let's make sure we understand the foundation first. So the teacher is writing their own prompt, picking the prompt from a curriculum. How are they generating the prompt, and kind of what are you seeing across teacher use?
We often see folks just take whatever they're already doing in class. So if that's an exit ticket where it's their core curriculum or it's an AP item, some teachers will write their own, some teachers are using released items. But whatever you're already doing, we basically created the framework around what a writing task looks like so that you can input whatever that may be.
Mhm.
Stimulus, no stimulus, etc.
And I, as a teacher, have to go through that calibration, or can I say, I trust you, you do it,
That's
enlighten
a,
without me?
that's a great question. So, any teacher can come in and can calibrate. You do have to calibrate. There's no option for you to just go to the first submission and say, you do it, TA, and I'll just see what you did.
Yeah.
We force the teacher to embed their expertise for better and for worse. That adds some, we think, productive friction. But increasingly, districts and charter networks have asked us to be able to have their curriculum lead, maybe a network instructional leader, do the calibration of the TA. And you can think of it as they train the TA. That TA now goes around to every classroom in the organization for a writing assessment and helps keep everybody aligned and consistent. And in some cases, the teacher can actually learn from how that TA has been calibrated.
Mhm.
So that's the other model that we're seeing become increasingly popular to sort of scale that solution and really embed some quality control, some sort of
Yeah.
shared expectations.
And I saw a fourth grade writing lesson using Enlighten, but tell us about grade span, subject area uses. Where are you seeing people use it the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's typically grades 3 through 12, since those are the most tested grade levels. We do have some higher ed as well. The TA can be calibrated to any grade level or subject. And so, not surprisingly, our most popular subject is English, but we see a lot of science, a lot of social studies, even some math where it is digitally submitted, though obviously less.
Mhm.
Um, and that programmability allows the TA to sort of learn from the task. It learns from the expert, whether that's the teacher or whether that's somebody at the district.
Mhm. And what do you think Enlighten is best at and provides the most value around? And where do you hope it gets better? Like, what are you fighting with Enlighten over? And what is the sort of product roadmap look like?
This is a great question. The thing that I think we're still best at is that calibrated writing assessment. So, where we started was always with the teacher in the loop, um, always based on sort of more of a summative style of assessment, not necessarily for summative assessment, but students would submit, they'd wait until the teacher works with the TA in order to score and give feedback. And so as a result of that, just being our first workflow, there's a
Mhm.
lot built around that. And so the thing that we actually do the best is we're able to roll up the data and the insights. In fact, I'd love to show this to you because it's
Yeah.
become my favorite part of the application, in fact. Um, I don't think you've actually seen this before. You wouldn't have seen this in your visit.
I visit. Okay.
So you can imagine that over the course of a school year, schools are giving assessments on the same rubric, for example. This is the Texas Star rubric.
Hmm.
And over time, what you really want to see is how are students doing? Like, what's the proficiency trend? Um, and previously, like in my school leadership days, it was really hard for us just to know that these scores are calibrated and accurate, and we can trust the growth over time. But because you have this AI TA working with every teacher, now you sort of have that natural anchor point and you can compare apples to apples. So you can test proficiency rates, you can see the distribution of students, you can see average scores by dimension over time. And then at the top there, what you saw was everyone's favorite, which is the strengths, the growth areas, and the recommendations. And so this just gives a much richer picture than I think we've ever had in terms of how our students actually performing on writing and how do we actually trust the numbers that we're seeing.
Hmm. I can imagine a lot of different uses for that, both from the teacher level and the leader level. Tell us about student interaction with Enlighten. How much are they getting feedback directly? You know, are you always gating it through that final human in the loop check, or are there times where teachers are using it in a way where they can give kids immediate feedback?
Yeah, this is the place where, to the second part of your question, I feel like we're catching up. So, as people began to trust the calibration, the voice, the accuracy of the TA that I showed you, they kind of asked us to bring this into the classroom too. And so that form of usage where students can basically interact with a TA that's circulating class, that when they, instead of submitting their first draft, they're actually getting feedback from that TA on the spot. I'll show you that in just a second too. That usage has actually doubled just in the past couple of months. Because I think what's happening is folks are realizing, okay, now we know where student writing is. So that's the assessment piece. But the way that we are going to push that writing is by giving dollops of feedback each week or,
Yep.
a couple of
Your
times a
point
week.
on what drove your own students' impact.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I'll show you what that looks like here, but I still feel like this is the place where the interaction pattern, the options to teachers, the options to students, um, I still feel like we're developing here.
Mhm.
But this is what it looks like for a student to get immediate feedback in Enlighten. So the TA has already been programmed by the teacher beforehand. They can plug in
And I think it's
examples,
clear, but let's just make sure that when you're using TA, that's like the teaching assistant.
the
That's
teaching
how
assistant.
you talk about Enlighten.
Exactly. So the
Okay.
teacher has done this setup in advance, or
Mhm.
this or the school or district has. So the task is there, the training is there. And
Mhm.
now when the student, sits for an exit ticket, or in this case, like a long essay question that may be timed, they'll
Mhm.
get in the moment line by line feedback aligned to the scoring rubric.
Mhm.
And instead of this being the end of the process, they can go through point by point. They
Mhm.
can see their scores. And ultimately, the thing that I think has been really motivating to kids is they can go back and improve those scores.
Mhm. So they can
Um,
do it again and then get feedback again.
exactly. Yeah. And I think like here, you probably saw this, like figuring out how to ensure that that feedback is accessible, that students use it, um, that it's differentiated. These are things that we're working on like very literally today. And so I'm pretty excited about where that goes, but
Mhm.
it's a newer side of the house for us for sure.
Yeah. And I think, as a pattern across this AI in Action Learning Tour, we're seeing different products take different approaches to how to try to make sure that that feedback is digestible, actionable, quality, et cetera. So I think this is a learning edge for the entire sector to some degree.
Yeah. And what a great, sometimes I think to myself, because I taught in like what is now kind of the dark ages of feedback, but
Mm.
it's such a great problem to me that what we're working on is how do we make this feedback more directive when we want it to be directive and more sort of inquisitive when we want it to be inquisitive? And how do we like scaffold the feedback so that it's building over time?
Mhm.
And what is the right amount now that, we could give feedback every day, but is that actually the right interaction pattern? So I'm excited by these questions because it's a very different world.
Yeah, me too. Tell us about impact. I mean, you've built Enlighten to do a number of different jobs, some that are really teacher focused around making their jobs more efficacious, some around now more direct student use. How are you thinking about what kind of impact you hope Enlighten will have, and what do you know about how you're doing against those aspirations?
Yeah, this is a great question. We're starting to build a growing body of evidence, and we're studying this explicitly right now. So we'll have really good data soon. We have a quasi-experimental design with Uncommon. The
Mhm.
early results there are positive for their AP US history classes. And so we'll see, when AP scores come out, and there will be some published work that comes out on that. But so far, so good in that more research designed setting. We have a number of case studies that kind of show a lot of impact. I think Dream Charters published a report with Charter School Growth Fund last year that just showed on their assessments they saw pretty big progress. We're not the only component of that. They're using a number of AI tools,
Mhm.
um, but they really credited us with helping them to sort of accelerate their formative assessment and summative assessment loop, so their data-driven reteaching. At Vox Collegiate in South Los Angeles, they were our earliest partner. They doubled the ELA proficiency in 2 years. And as you know, as well as I, there's a ton of great stuff that has to happen for that. But again, their leadership would say, like, this, some of the great work that we were doing, we could do because Enlighten made this scalable or practical. Um, and the same thing is true of Blackstone Valley Prep, like these feedback cycles where students are getting feedback, revising. In some cases, there's a writing conference in there. So there's very different models around what you do with the feedback. But ultimately, in all of these cases, what we're seeing is that it's working. At KIP, which is our biggest partner, we're seeing fluency data, which can be a leading indicator. That's just, there's a noticeable level of difference for the students who have access to Enlighten, and especially for immediate feedback.
Mhm.
Um, but in the interest of being sort of balanced too, like I'm not just sort of talking my book, there's some really interesting learnings here too, which maybe we haven't talked about before. But one of the interesting learnings from KIP has been there's kind of two dimensions to their main rubric, idea development and conventions.
Hmm.
Where we're seeing the most growth has been in idea development. So it's a lot easier for a student to take feedback that says like, hey, can you expand on this and add more? But it's
Hmm.
actually kind of a different skill set to go back into your writing and revise. And that again requires a slightly different interaction pattern for the student, a slightly different user experience. So
And a
really
slightly
digging into
different
that right now.
implementation use case for teachers in many ways too.
Yeah, and in some ways it could be a totally different design than what we have, right? So the convention's rubric trait, we're also sort of finding the limitations of rubrics is they can be somewhat vague or general, and so they're guiding the AI in a way that may not be as specific. The rubric is not the teacher. And so, one of the suggestions that came from another user the other day was like, do we need to have like sort of a separate last step that is a grammar and convention sweep,
Hmm.
right? Do we need to place this at a different part of the process as opposed to having it be sort of the students developing their ideas and improving their conventions all at once, or do you chunk these, right? These are really interesting questions that I think we're sort of exploring and experimenting with.
Yeah. One last question. It strikes me that Enlighten, in some ways, is like a really flexible product. And you all have stories of working with different schools, thinking of using it in very different ways. And yet, in some ways, you're also trying to think deeply about impact and sort of what is this vision of use that might be more repeatable, that you're designing the product to sort of like nudge towards a particular vision of use. How do you think about like what you want to be when you grow up in relationship between this question of sort of flexible use versus more of a constructed vision?
That's a great question. It's a good thing that we're not grown up just yet, because I really wrestle with this. And the reason for that is, you know, we do make some hard-coded decisions underneath the hood, right? Like the AI is pre-programmed to be specific, to be actionable. The
Mhm.
way in which that gets shaped by the teacher can change. But very often we hear from teachers that out of the box, it's able to give more or better feedback than they've been able to, or that they're learning some of the skills of feedback through that.
Mhm.
So there are opportunities like that for us. I
Mhm.
think the place where we probably wrestle the most is the implementation of high quality instructional materials. So if you have a curriculum or if you're teaching like an AP history like I was and like the folks in Uncommon are testing, um, there's just like a wide range of needs that emerge. And so there's so much adjustment, so much adaptation that has to be done there. And so I think like right now our position has been that that needs to be encoded by an instructional expert who has that local context.
Mhm.
Um, and the framework of embedding a writing task, that's the part that is usually the same.
Mhm.
But the context of how you're building, how long your class periods are,
Mhm.
um, if we hard code too much or if we make the system too rigid or just decide what good feedback looks like for all kids, it's very easy for me to imagine, especially with this experience, that that will fall flat. I
Mhm.
saw uh, a nationally board certified teacher who's had some of the best results in AP Gov, like bar none, and her feedback style is just totally different from what like I would have done in my AP class and what I'm seeing from other teachers, but it works for her. And so it's been hard, it's hard for us to take too strong a position there.
Mhm.
Um, and I think so far so good in terms of like allowing folks to embed their expertise. But I do think there will be a place where to make it more general purpose and more accessible in mass, we'll have to come up with more on how do we sort of like support you know, schools that don't necessarily want to exercise that level of control, and that there's no knock on that. That just may be
Yep.
a different approach to the product.
Yep. Terrific. Well, I'm excited for the progress that I hope we as a country are going to be able to make in writing. It's obviously an area that many a college professor bemoans the current state of student preparation. And while there are opinions out there about, in an age of everybody has a writing assistant, will writing matter? I'm certainly of the conviction that it's probably going to matter more, not less, actually. And so I'm excited to learn from all your learning about how to make sure that those feedback loops to students really yield better writing.
Yeah, it is kind of blowing my mind to just see what we learn when we're able to put feedback in front of people in this way and get feedback from users about, those interaction patterns, the experience of students, the experience of teachers, what kind of ways teachers are sort of like what information they need to be able to take this data and do something with it. Um, that's an exciting time. I'm sure I'll be picking your brain repeatedly throughout the next uh, no limit on that time period for
Yeah,
a while
well,
to
I feel
figure
very
out.
lucky to get to learn from so many of the range of examples out there right now. Thank
Yeah,
you
yeah,
so much for your time, Gotham, and we'll stay in touch over time.
yeah. Thank you, Emily. Great to be here.
Thanks.